Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the global audience here today. I'd like to welcome you all to the Turing Boundaryless Series. I'm your host, Mimi Zhang, Enterprise Sales and Partnerships here at Turing.com. We have a very special guest today. We've got Deepak Tiwari. He is the VP and Head of Product here at Turing, where he's responsible for the company's product vision and scaling. In this role, he leads the product management, product design, technical program management, and product analytics functions. He's super passionate about building products that solve customer problems, creating delight with user experience, and leveraging data and intelligence. Previously, he led product teams at Facebook, Lyft, and Google. For today, we're going to be discussing how great products can unleash new possibilities. After all, it is possible to build great tech products with globally distributed teams. Deepak, so you've got quite the career in starting out as an engineering manager, then later moving into product-centric leadership roles. So tell us more about your story and your journey.
First of all, thank you, Mimi, for having me here today. I'm very glad to be here speaking to you and also reaching out to all of the viewers. About my journey, I feel like at the core of my experience, I have really always enjoyed solving problems and creating value for the customers and for the business. I started my career as an engineer and really enjoyed that challenge and day-to-day solving deeper technical problems. But as I grew in my career, I started to interact and collaborate a lot with other functional areas within the company. And I started to become really passionate about connecting everything that I was doing with the value that we were creating for the customer and then the value that we're creating for the business. So as a sort of natural progression of that, I went to business school, and after business school, I worked in strategy consulting. So in a way, like, product management is a natural progression for me, because for me, product management combines 2 or 3 key things that I have done in my past. One of them is technology, especially when you're doing being a PM in tech. It also combines like the business strategy side of things and ability to like serve customers or clients or consumers. And that's how I think about it. So as I grew in my career, I saw product manager as like this natural confluence of everything that I had loved before that coming in together in one role. So that's how I made sort of my journey into product management.
That's really cool that you have perspective of both sides. And I'm curious, what kind of products have you built?
So I have actually worked on many different types of products. I actually think in my career, I have never worked on 2 products that were the same. So in some ways, it's like a very interesting thing. I started my career at Google more on the consumer side, and worked on products like Google Search, purely consumer side of the world. We're talking about like products that have like more than 1 billion users. Second half of my career, I moved to Boston and in the Cambridge office, and I worked in Google Cloud Platform. So that's completely different. That's basically an infrastructure service product, building and selling to enterprise. So it was a very different experience for me. But first 3.5 years at Google on consumer, last 3.5 years at Google on the B2B cloud side. So that's what I've done. At Lyft, I worked on marketplace, data, machine learning products. And then at Facebook, I worked on ads product, especially ranking of ads. So it's been really, really interesting. As you can see, I've never worked on 2 of the same product. And then Turing, in some ways, is like, there's many similarities with many things I've done before, but it's also like a brand new problem that I'm solving while bringing in the core understanding of product management and how do you build product and scale them. But those are the products I had built in my past.
That's awesome. Those are very different types of products. And I'm curious to hear from the product side, what has your experience been in hiring really good engineers versus looking at it from your engineering hat?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting question. I feel like one thing that sort of comes to my mind is like when you're hiring as an engineering manager, a lot of times you're looking for different skills, but perhaps you might be indexing a little bit more towards the hard skills of engineering. So coding skills, as well as algorithmic skills, system design. But as you start to really collaborate, as you grow, as I grew myself as like an engineering manager, and I started to work with other functions, but also when I eventually became one of those other functions, I crossed over to the product management side. I really started to realize how important it is to perhaps not only focus on those core skills for engineering, but also to focus on communication, focus on soft skills, some of the other soft skills, like how does people collaborate? How do they manage a situation of conflict, for example, and how do they deliver together? And I think those things become important. So I would say from the very beginning, as an engineering leader, all of those dimensions were important. As a product leader, when I look at that, the same dimensions are important to me, but I think I'd probably put a slightly different weightage. Like I would probably put like a more even weightage across all those different like hard skills and soft skills. Earlier, as an engineering leader, maybe I've really focused more on the hard skills side, because now I've seen at least from both sides and how important it is. So that's one thinking that I have. But in general, one thing I would like to share is that hiring good engineers is hard, and you have to build pretty much an outstanding system to be able to bring in great developers, especially in the environment that we live in, where good developers are in great demand. Anything you can do to reduce boundary, like it's really like only apt that when we talk about Turing, we talk about boundaryless as well. But anything you can do to focus on things that you really want to hire for, and reducing all the other constraints also really helps in terms of hiring. So that's another thing that I've learned over both as an engineering manager, but also as a product leader in my career.
On that note of engineers learning more of the soft skills side, do you have any recommendations of maybe like resources they should look at?
I feel like maybe there's some quick hacks. Like it's just like how do you change your mentality and how do you change your thinking, which can really be helpful. So a lot of times, especially when I started as an engineer in my career early on, I was really focused on like solving the engineering problem that was in front of me. And then later on, like after many years in my career, I started to really connect that with a customer problem that we're trying to solve. And how can I do things differently that could solve the customer problem better? And like, how can I go actually really deeper and not only understanding the engineering and technical problem that I'm trying to solve and architect a solution and code it, but also really spend a lot of time upfront in really understanding the customer needs, so nothing gets lost in translation. So I feel like just one hack I would say is that as an engineer, really think about build that empathy for the customer, right? And engineers, as engineers, we all the time we use products that others have built for us. Similarly, we are building products for others. How can we develop that empathy? And every time we think about that from that customer-centric view, it then forces us to develop those kind of soft skills, collaborate with people within the company. It also forces us to communicate better our plans and what we're doing, because then we start to understand like how everything that we're doing has an impact on finally the quality of what we deliver. So that is one quick hack. Of course, there's a lot of learning resources. I know if you go to any of the learning providers and Udacity, Coursera, they definitely have all the technical learning and lessons and courses that you can do, but they also have it on soft skills and leadership. Depending on what company you're in, if your company provides the service through one of these providers, that's great. Make use of that. Take some of those leadership ones as well. I think YouTube is a great resource. There's a lot of these things. If you just Google search or search on YouTube, you'll be able to find. So a lot of those things are just available very freely in today's world. I feel like more we are constrained by time that we have rather than resources, but there are a lot of resources. But I think just understanding that it's important as an engineer to develop those things is going to be useful.
Empathy and curiosity, I can see those two being primary drivers. And going back to the problem of hiring really good engineers is hard. It takes a long time. How are we doing this at Turing? What is our approach that's different?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at Turing, one of our core philosophy is that for our core Turing team, fully applicable, as well as for the developers that get hired at our customers, remote is basically at the core of it. Like I was saying, that one of the things you can do is really focus on what are you looking for as you're building a team, and then take out everything that is not important. And if it's possible for you to take away a constraint, geo is a big constraint. Like one of the ways that I really think about this is that, unfortunately, in our world today, like while talent is very equitably distributed around the world, opportunities unfortunately are not, right? I live in San Francisco. The kind of opportunities that are available on the West Coast and in the US in general, in Silicon Valley or Seattle, sometimes are not available to somebody who's in like a great developer in Nigeria or in Sao Paulo or in a small city in India. So how do we change that? That is one constraint that we removed from the day one when we're hiring for Turing, and also to our core philosophy of how do we make this developer pool available to the rest of the world. So I would say like remove the constraints that don't really add value. That's one thing, because as I was mentioning, hiring good developers is really hard, especially in today's environment. There's a lot of really meaningful problems to solve in hiring that have not been fully solved. You have to build an outstanding system for hiring that actually does some of the core things really well, like sourcing. So can you reach out? Can you source? If you're building a team in your own location where you are, do you have a really strong sourcing pipeline there? If you now want to expand, can you create that pipeline in all of the locations that you want to hire for? How do you actually see that as an opportunity and not that as a challenge? The second is like vetting, like interviewing. It's hard. How do you evaluate? A lot of companies do interviews and vetting, and they realize many years later when they look at the data on their own side that success of the job has nothing to do with how they were interviewing or how they were vetting and how they're evaluating candidates. And then finally, how do you close? Like, how do you then convert these great engineers and developers to come and work for you? I feel during the way we are really trying to solve this, we are basically creating this talent cloud that does all of this for our customers. We have world-class sourcing. We understand the talent situation all over the world, of course in the US, but of course in Latin America, also like in South Asia, also in Africa, in Europe, in Eastern Europe. Everywhere we understand it, and we can bring to bear our understanding and the sourcing engine that we have already built so that our customers don't have to build it again and again. And then same with vetting. Like, we are a very science-driven company. We really understand how evaluation works. And also then we have a lot of data now where we can actually see what does success in a job look like. How can we correlate that back to building a better vetting engine? And every single day, our vetting engine is becoming better. So those are the kind of things. There's a lot of other things around closing that we take care of beforehand, right? Before all of those conversations actually and interviews actually happen. So that's how I feel like a problem can be solved, and how we at Turing building the product that we're building to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think that the challenge that we've seen with companies is that on average, it takes 2 to 3 months from start to finish in finding a new candidate. Instead, that time could be used to quickly ramp up someone and have new products being built instead of delays that are happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then one of the things I was saying is that sometimes when you remove constraints, it creates other challenges or opportunities for you. One of the things, for example, that we also focus on, apart from all of those things that I mentioned, is around post-match. So once the match actually happens, once the remote developer starts to work at a customer's problems, then we provide a lot of post-match product. An example of that is like security. Sometimes remote developer security can be a concern, and we provide our own virtual machines where we can put an image on top of that has all the right tooling for productivity in place day one for onboarding a particular developer, but also has all the right security settings, VPN setup and everything, reporting tooling that is already available on that from day one. So there's like all of this product that we have built that makes not only hiring, but also then onboarding and like day-to-day management of engineering easier.
Yeah, I think that's a great alternative to, say, shipping out a laptop, perhaps, so clients can get started faster with our virtual machine.
Absolutely. And then, or you can still ship like a standard laptop, but the power of a virtual machine, and you can configure the VM to be anything, like very powerful machine, or scale it as you need it. It's a very containerized environment. So absolutely, I think it's a great alternative to that. But also, even if you're doing it, it adds a lot of power to it.
How should an engineering leader or product leader think about building culture in a remote first setup? Because it is different from, say, being in office or hybrid.
The way I feel about this is that enabling the success of remote employees pretty much needs to be the core value of the company, right? Because if it's not, then things will end up being lip service and will not really fall into place. An example of that is when you're hiring, make sure that when you say it's remote, you really embrace remote. If you do have some constraints where you want certain time zone section, make sure that you're willing to go remote. You set up an expectation of what time zone the work will be in, or if you're hiring people, like, so you have some overlap at least of time zones, if that is important to you. If that's not important to you, make sure that you have the right tooling in place, so you can actually interact with people, and even you can do async communication, which sometimes, again, is a challenge, but also an opportunity. Sometimes by the time you wake up, a lot of the work that you were expecting to get done might actually get done for you. So I think there's a lot of value in that, but it really needs to be core value from the perspective that how do you, not only how you hire, but also how do you set expectation, but also how do you actually enable career progression? I've actually seen this in a lot of companies, a lot of big companies specifically, where you can be remote, but then you almost like your career will have a ceiling if you stay remote, and at some point of time you have to come to be in the headquarters if you want your career to grow further or if you want to be a team manager or like or a leader in the company. And I feel like we are living in a different world now, right? So if you're embracing remote, embrace it fully, allow even leaders to be wherever they are, or as people grow, the career progression and like calibration and promotion, make sure that you're equitable when you're thinking about remote and you're not only doing that for the leadership team in one common place. That is one thought that I have in terms of core value. But then, like as I was mentioning, apart from core value, once you have that in place, you will be able to build a culture. And then things that actually really help with culture is processes. So you have the right processes in place for working remotely. An example of that could be, for example, that perhaps if to make things work in a remote environment, you need to do more than you were doing earlier, because earlier everybody was sitting in the same office, in the same room, perhaps, or you can get into a conference room. Whiteboard, you cannot do that. So better documentation, better onboarding is really key. Tooling, whatever any company uses, Slack, Facebook Workplace, Google Docs, Microsoft 365, whatever it is that you use, Teams. I think it's really, really important to have the right tooling in place to enable this collaboration.
And along those same lines, how would you deal with conflict in a remote setting?
Conflict in remote setting can be addressed by, first of all, proactively by setting up really clear expectations. A lot of times conflicts arise because there's not clarity, accountability, expectations have not been set up. Like making sure companies do that upfront well is really important. And then second is over communicating, right? As things are going, as people are working every single day and executing on things that need to be worked on, making sure that, again, people are leveraging tools that are in place, but there's a culture of over communication. There's a culture of transparency, which is really needed to an extent. Like I was saying, like being over transparent, being over communicating, that really, really helps in keeping everybody aligned. Otherwise, conflict can arise. But once conflict arises, you can probably reduce it, might not be able to eliminate it. But once, if it arises, again, making sure that whatever platform or tooling that you're using, bring people together, like in a live setting, like not in person, but on a conference call, have a conversation. Like, so similar things that you would do in an office setting, I would say like at that point of time, nothing different there. But I feel like the great opportunity with remote is that with better upfront preparation, you can actually scale better and actually reduce any conflict happening.
Interesting. And is this your first completely remote role, or have you also worked remote in the other organizations like Google and Facebook and Lyft?
Yeah, so for me, this is like the first fully 100% remote role. Again, I have had some taste of like hybrid, at least in my previous role. So like most recently I was at Facebook, and at Facebook I was part of a great team. Like, you know, I had a great manager, fond memories from there. And I felt was a very flexible culture there. So not that I live too far from the headquarters. We live in San Francisco and the office is in Menlo Park, but I would go to office twice a week. One day out of the week, I worked out of the San Francisco office. I took all the meetings and stuff from there. And 2 days, Facebook has one day anyway, like Wednesdays, there's no meeting Wednesdays. And then Fridays, usually also people avoid doing a lot of meetings and working late. So those 2 days I just worked from home. So I was in some ways, like I had a lot great support culture, like, you know, structure in a big company like Facebook that I really enjoyed. So I was already in a hybrid environment. I don't know what will happen post pandemic. But yeah, I think this is my first fully remote role, which I am really enjoying.
What ways have you seen perhaps like your life benefiting from being completely remote?
I think some of those are very obvious. One of them is that, of course, no commute. Although I do miss commute time sometimes because it gives you a great time to think and introspect on things and all that kind of stuff. So I do miss it sometimes, but I don't miss it usually. My commute was like 1 way was an hour nearly. So saving 2 hours in a day is really, really helpful. I can spend more time with family, which is great. I can actually support my wife a little bit more in our personal stuff. I have the kids drop off and pick up duties, which happen from 7:30 to 8 and then 5 to 5:30. And I believe like if I had to commute, might not have been always possible, depending on the meetings and things like that. So working in a remote culture is great because I drop off my kids and then I'm ready to take any meeting after 8:30, even if I keep a little bit buffer. And then up to 5, I'm fully available and then I go pick up kids. So has actually reduced a lot of stress in my life about many of those things with family and kids. Remote has worked out great for me. And I sometimes, for example, on Fridays, I also take my daughter for swim lessons because it's so hard to find spot for swim. Again, if I was commuting, I would not be able to do that, like taking her to a 2 p.m. swim lesson. But I'm able to do that because I work from home, and then like elementary school is like literally 4 blocks from where we live. So a lot of advantages that I am getting very used to working in a remote first company. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you're having a lot more quality family time that you otherwise would not. I think for me, one of the things I've enjoyed the most is I can also travel and maybe work from one place for a month. For example, in June, I was based in Mexico and I had my best performing month. So, that was great to have that freedom. And you could too if you wanted to go somewhere for a certain amount.
That is great. That's outstanding. We actually thought about that. We did not do it immediately as soon as like when the pandemic happened. And then after that, maybe three or 4 months later, when we started to think about, hey, should we go to Hawaii for a few months, or should we go to like Boulder, Colorado for a few months or something like that? Around that time, we realized that things had started to reopen here, and like kids, like preschools and like after school started to reopen. Even if the school time itself was virtual, like the after school opened up. So then we were a little bit bound by that, so we didn't do it. But I love that you were able to do that, and I wish I could do that too.
I hope that at some point, maybe when the schedules coordinate, understand with the school situation, that your family will be able to do that at some point. And going back to product and engineering, I wanted to ask, what are some ways like product and engineering can work together most effectively in a remote environment?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of really good tooling now that is available, products that are available that really help with that. I actually feel like they would have been helpful in a non-remote setting as well. But I think definitely them being available almost makes being remote totally cool. One thing that I had also mentioned earlier was like around clarity, right? So clarity of roles and responsibilities. Product development or building a product is basically a collaborative exercise. By the way, not only between engineering and product management, but also product design, data science, technical program management. Everybody needs to really come together. And then when you're ready to launch, product marketing, sales, everybody needs to be really part of this building the product experience. I feel like just clarity on the roles and accountability, especially between a PM and engineering, the way I like to always think about it is pretty standard now, but like the why and the what of product is basically like an accountability of product management to answer how it gets built, how with the architectural decisions, like technical decisions, how to build it is engineering. Again, PM needs to collaborate, but it's engineering accountability. Who builds it is also an engineering leader decides, or a technical program manager can decide it. When something gets delivered, launching and all that kind of stuff. I feel like, again, technical program management or engineering can play a more key role there. So again, just understanding like the roles have like very clear accountability that are different definitely helps. And from a tooling perspective, I have really enjoyed. At different places I've used different tooling. Like at Facebook, I have used like the Facebook Workplace, which is really helpful. But also I have used Jira and Trello that have been really helpful in like managing things that we're doing. Here we do use, of course, Jira, but also Asana, and that has been really helpful as well. So like that collaboration on a day-to-day basis. Of course, Google Docs been great, very helpful because PRDs that we write, technical specifications, specs that we write, like design documents that are written by engineering, they're all in Google Docs, and then we collaborate. So there's a lot of asynchronous ways now to collaborate, synchronous tooling like ways as well, but like a lot of asynchronous ways to collaborate, and making sure using that tooling and building that culture of using those tools in your company can really accelerate productivity and speed, velocity of product development.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we're at a better spot now with all the different tools that have come out. From an individual developer level, what might be some challenges they might face in a remote setup? And how can they avoid such challenges?
I actually feel like making remote work takes a lot of upfront, but once you do it, actually it makes you more scalable in the long run. So I feel like it's like a classical like challenge, but a great opportunity. So it's like paying a little effort every time somebody is coming. You have to put a big effort upfront, but once you do that, then it's pretty much like the marginal cost of doing it again and again becomes pretty low. So an example of that could be the challenges or the opportunities is in onboarding and training. So even the first day you start with, and I remember with a lot of companies, they were not really ready for pandemic. And when people started to onboard remotely, they did not even have the infrastructure ready in place on day one. They figured it out. They all figured it out very quickly, but they didn't have the infrastructure ready day one to ship laptops even. So I remember back in the day, like people were getting their laptops maybe like a week later or something like that, and things like that were happening at even at Facebook. But the system learned it very quickly and focused on it. But then onboarding is really hard because a lot of the and sessions that are built are like more built for people coming in one place and interacting, or a lot of it is about just being present in an environment, an office environment with other people. And I feel like that is changing. So for example, the challenge is in onboarding. How do you train new developers that you bring on board? Because every company's sometimes infrastructure is different. So even if all the coding skills and everything is there for the engineer, they need to understand what CI/CD tools are being used. Like how do you actually do release management? How do you like hook up to the right environment, and understanding the context of what is being developed here. Again, a lot of those things where you can just get into a conference room, whiteboard, water cooler conversations. You don't have that context now, and then day-to-day collaboration. But like I was saying, all of this is opportunity. The way I think about it is like documentation, planning takes a very critical role in a remote first company. So as long as your planning is really solid, your documentation about everything is in really, really good place, it actually helps you. And then not just onboard 10 developers, but 100 developers. Like then the 90 you can do very quickly. It's like a lot of upfront costs. So those are some of the challenges or breaking points that can actually happen in a remote environment. But I feel like if effort is put up front in making all of those things solid, then I feel like it really helps in the long run for the company.
That kind of gave me an idea here. I think we have an opportunity here to help various companies as they build out their infrastructure around remote and content around onboarding and training, as we're doing it at scale. Mm-hmm.
That is correct. I feel like there's a lot of innovation happening in general in the industry around this that I hear about pretty much every single day, and how this is happening all the way from hiring to tooling and resources that are available for vetting now, like in a remote environment, and as well as onboarding, all of these things that are available. But of course, one of the things that we are doing very heavily and in a very focused way at Turing is building all of those capabilities for the developers that we have and then the customers that we serve. So building a lot of this tooling from end to end, like from sourcing to vetting to matching to post-match experience, is something that I feel like we are really focused on. We feel like I fully agree that it's a great opportunity ahead of us and very much an unsolved problem. And it's great that there's a lot of innovation happening. A lot of different companies are trying to solve it in many different ways, but we are also doing our bit to solve it in the ways we understand and how we can contribute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very exciting with everything that's going on and all the different learnings we can glean from our company and share with other companies and other companies sharing with us. I remember from a previous conversation that we had where you mentioned the concept of golden time and the possibility of traveling sometimes, actually meeting as needed. So if you could elaborate on that for some folks in our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things that somehow we talked about it together, but those are like slightly different things. One is remote teams, and one of them is distributed teams, right? So you can work remotely, but still be don't have to be part of a distributed team, because all of you can be on the West Coast, and sure, even on the West Coast you're distributed, but at least not distributed from a time zone perspective. Or let's say everybody's sitting in San Francisco in their home, so technically you're all remote, but then you're not really a distributed team. So I feel like there's technically maybe slightly two different things. And one of the things that we are really excited about is both. One thing that remote really opens up is, sure, your other engineer that you're collaborating with doesn't have to sit in San Francisco. She could be sitting in like New York City, or she could be sitting in Hawaii, or she could be sitting in London. So I think that is the great thing. And I have had an opportunity, again, not remote people coming to the office, but I have had distributed teams when I was at Google. So when I was at Google, I had people on the team who were working out of Dublin office, to working out of London office, who were working out of Zurich office. And one of the challenges was then is like with California time, when do you actually meet them? And then this concept of the golden time we came up with. I mean, I'm sure everybody else is using that too, but we came up with literally saying that, okay, what are the times that we think we get an overlap, right, between London office, Dublin office, and California office, or in some cases like for the Tokyo office and California office. So what is that golden time? Like, when do we think we can have? And usually in any of those kind of remote scenarios or distributed scenarios, what you'll have is like you'll have 2 to 3 to 4 hours that you think like work for both sides. The idea is really to use that time very effectively and to do everything that you need to do synchronously team meetings, weekly team meetings, because you also want participation of everybody in the meeting. I also remember back in the day, Google has this like great culture of doing TGIF that is like really popular. And like back in the day, like Larry and Sergey would come, and now Sundar leads it. But they used to actually happen Friday evening, which is perfect for California, but it was not perfect for London. And that means people are already like really late on the Friday. And even if they want to watch the recording of it, they'll be watching it on Monday. It's almost like a new week. So then Google started to do TGIF on Thursdays. It's interesting, like TGIF is happening on Thursday, but like that was really things that internally the company started to realize, like we're a global company, we're a distributed company. Like even if you're not remote, everybody's coming to offices, or maybe in like location, the similar location for a particular product that we're building. But that's how the concept of golden time emerged, at least for us. So keeping that in mind would be really, really helpful. Another thing that is really helpful is like when you have people in different places, it is important to travel sometimes. So you can actually meet with the team. I remember like you all had your like sales conference. So I was there and met the entire team, and it was really good time. But traveling sometimes is really important. So you can actually meet with the team in person from time to time, offsites, like strategy sessions, just like meeting team before lunch or like dinner or something like that I think is really important. Yeah. So those are my thoughts on the things that we had spoken about earlier.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Deepak, that remote and globally distributed, they're not necessarily the same things, they're different. So thanks for pointing that out. And on a different note, for any engineers who want to get into product, one of the things that would probably help them is having that customer empathy. But what are some of the other tips that you would recommend for them if they are leaning towards product?
Absolutely. I think one of the core things is that, especially if for developers who might be thinking about product, or maybe it's true for everybody in general, is that making a connection with the business value. So I feel like in many ways, like the two core fundamental principles is like, are you creating value for the customer? That's probably the single most important thing. And then the second thing is, because we're all in business, we're in the business of doing business, how are we creating value? How are we capturing some of that value for our business? I think those are really the core things. And having an interest or understanding of developing some understanding of both of those is really, really important, irrespective of whatever function people come from. Some functions are actually by nature slightly more like inclined towards one versus the other. So making sure whichever function that you're coming from, you develop the skills for the other one. I feel like if you're an engineer, you probably already connect really well with the customer. You already have customer empathy. You already have like technical depth. But like, how do you connect everything that you're doing to a business value? So you understand like the metric, company metric that you're impacting, the user metric that you're impacting, and your work will impact, and helping perhaps even getting better prioritization. So as you move more towards product, those things become important. Some of the other things are like, how do you work in a constrained environment? Because in nowhere, including places like Google and Facebook that I have worked in, you will have infinite resources to do anything. So how do you actually work in a constrained environment? Sometimes the constraint is time, not even resources. But how do you work in a constrained environment to deliver an innovative solution? Sometimes people say mother of innovation need, or like constraint actually breeds innovation. So I think that's probably a good thing in a way. But how do you work in that kind of environment and then deliver the best value for the customer and business? So innovative thinking is also really, really important from that perspective. I'm also seeing more and more like the product managers who are really successful are also very data driven and very analytical driven. So ability to like look at data to an extent where you can actually do a little bit of a data scientist job as needed. Go into the data, understand some of those insights, not be fully dependent on analytics to always do that. Like writing your own SQL queries, looking at the data, understanding the structure of the data in the company. I think those are really becoming more important for a product manager. And then last, this is one thing that usually nobody talks about that much, and usually is not even part of the interview process in many places. But like one of the biggest things that defines success of a product manager, I would say, is written communication skills, right? As a PM, you write a lot of documents. As a PM, you write product requirement documents, you write vision documents. Making sure that you develop those skills of written communication skills. You will write like post for customers when you're releasing a product. How do you communicate different audiences? If you're an entrepreneur, you'll be writing communication for investors. So I feel that all of those things are very important. And last but not the least, written communication that usually doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, those are very good tips. And Deepak, I just wanted to say thank you for your time today. It was very insightful. we got to look into challenges that the product and engineering leaders they face with globally distributed teams, challenges around hiring, how Turing solves these challenges through our streamlined vetting process, and how engineers can win in a remote environment. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Mimi. Great to see you again. Take care.
Great seeing you.